Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Purpose Up podcast. Today, I am very excited to have with me Holly Woods Ph.D. Welcome, Holly.
Hey, Ben. Great to be here. Thank you.
So excited to have you. We're going to be talking about all things purpose, your new book, The Golden Thread. But first, let's tell the audience a little bit about who you are and how you would describe yourself at, let's say, a cocktail party.
Well, I really love helping people find out what they're here to do in life and live into that. So I call that living on purpose. It is a version of you that is most authentic, most alive, most dynamic, and passionate about your life. And that can look anything like a particular role in life or a career or a business. And generally that is something that you've been doing your whole life but didn't necessarily know it. And I help people find out what that thing is, the thing you can't not do. And, we can talk about it as coming from source or God or, divine. And we can also just talk about it as the aliveness in your life. And that is what propels most of us to have meaningful, joyful, abundant lives. So I help people live into that.
All right. I think that's a beautiful mission. And I know in the beginning of your book, we'll just hop right into it. You have a purpose statement. Can you share with us your purpose statement? Just because I think it's so powerful in how you've kind of distilled it so powerfully.
Yeah. So there are several facets. There are 4 facets actually that I speak about in my purpose statement. And each of us has this kind of very unique, nuanced, granular, one-of-a-kind purpose. And this is what I help people find is I speak powerful truths to shine love onto shadow, to liberate soul's potential, to reunite love and power. So just briefly, the speaking powerful truths means that I can see truth as it exists from my perspective. And I have the courage and the confidence to speak that. And and each of these facets, the 4 facets, I've learned to do better over time, so that some of what we have to do with our purpose is learn to share it in a way that it's actually contribution as opposed to someone, doing wounding for others. So me learning to speak powerfully took a lot of refinement and a lot of uncovering of my own shadow in order to do that in a way that was gracious and generous as opposed to indicting or judging.
And the second blowing stuff up.
Yeah, which I certainly had years of blowing stuff up because there's no end to the power that's available in this being that I am, and doing that, speaking powerful truths in a way that are useful and serve people as opposed to, shining a flashlight in their eyes about things that aren't working. So it's taken a lot of time and effort on my part. The second facet is to shine love onto shadow. And again, it's not the shining a light in someone's eyes, it's actually shining love. So my intent as I speak powerful truths is actually to help people become more of themselves. So I shine love onto both the gift, which is often shadowed, and the challenges or the shadow itself. So when we begin to see ourselves in both sides of that purpose coin that I call it, we can see the beauty and the magnificence of who we are and also how we hold ourselves back. Liberating soul's potential really happens when we begin to imagine that we are both sides of that coin and it all happens perfectly, that I have these gifts I'm here to contribute, and I also have these things that hold me back, the barriers in life or the hurdles that I must overcome in order to live more fully as myself. And then ultimately the point of living on purpose, right, is to be empowered in a way that I get to be fully here and fully sharing my contribution, which is from love. I mean, if I'm loving myself and I'm loving being a human, contributing fully, there is no greater expression of love on the planet as a human being than living fully on purpose. So that's me in a nutshell.
All right. If I was drinking still, I'd say let's have another drink at that cocktail party because you just unloaded a lot on me. For those that may not be as familiar with what the shadow is, let's talk a little bit about shadow. Sounds shady.
Well, yeah, it is. And so shadow is anything that isn't obvious to ourselves about how we are in the world. And it's called shadow literally because we can't see it. Often other people in our life can point right directly at, Ben, that's what you do, and you always do that, and it's every time I see you, I experience that, and sometimes it's really blatant and harmful and destructive, and other times it's just some little nuance about who you are that might not be necessarily serving, but isn't a big deal. And so as we become more concerned and committed to living on purpose, we want to really examine those parts of ourselves that we can't necessarily see. So this is where self-reflection and self-inquiry comes in, and also having someone being able to point out generously and graciously that those things exist and they are hurdles for you for living more fully as yourself, not some perfect person or being, but you probably would be more effective if we worked on this little thing, this muscle. And so when I work on people, literally we point these things out and say, now these are some other ways that you might be in this particular aspect of yourself, so you could have more effectiveness.
What's an example of a tricky shadow that you've overcome, shed light on, that has been really changed things for you?
Well, I mentioned speaking powerful truths earlier, and I don't have to go into that, but literally as a young child, I've had a lot of power in this lifetime, and I didn't know it. And so this actually, there's several facets of this, but because I didn't know I had all this power, I would hold it back, so that's another form of shadow, is when we hold back the gifts of who we are and they remain hidden. And then it's kind of a passive aggressive thing when you have this thing that you don't want to share in the world for fear or trepidation or something, and then all of a sudden it just comes out, like I can't hold back anymore. And that's when I would verbally vomit on people or judge and criticize them because I had seen something that I wasn't able to share or articulate. So our shadow can, one particular thing, like me speaking powerful truths, had several, actually quite a few elements of shadow related to it. It was a big one to conquer, that kept me from speaking in a way that was loving and generous. So the, acerbic, sort of caustic way of speaking truths that I had at one point, and the hiding of that capacity, and the knowing, the right timing, how to do that in a way that someone could receive the truth about what I saw. Those are all ways that were shadow for me that I had to learn to get past.
And in your work with clients, what are some of those patterns that you see? Is it unique to each of us, or are there certain patterns where it's like, if most people worked on this, we'd be better off?
Well, that's a great question, Ben. So all of us writ large, like probably 100% of humans on the planet, and this is something I do talk about in the book, don't really want to be ourselves. Firstly, because we are born into families who don't really know anything about us. My belief is that our soul brings us back here in order to express a purpose. And then we're born and we have what I call amniotic amnesia. We have no idea why we came back, and we set ourselves up in this context, in this scenario, like as a game, like, okay, I'm here, give me all the parts and roll the dice. And our family has no idea who we are really, and they're doing their best to help us progress through stages of childhood. And so we come into these scenarios in the context of a family who has these particular values and belief systems based on their childhoods. And then we're slipped into that, and somehow in all of that, we're supposed to become ourselves in this very repressive, tightening, constricted culture of our family and our community, our tribes and our communities, nation state, etc. And all of that is really designed specifically to hit us on the head with, no, can't be yourself, almost intentionally, so that we have to butt up against it. Like, no, I want to be myself. I want to be myself because that's the only thing that really feels good. So all of us are living these constrained contexts, in which we're taught to believe I am not worthy, I am not good enough, I am not enough. So some version of that, my not enoughness, I'm not worthy enough. We all have some nuanced expression of that, every one of us, 100%. And so if we look deep into that, what is our expression? What is the belief that I tell myself about who I am in the world that limits my full expression? And where does that originate? How did my family, bless their hearts, they're doing their best. I'm not indicting families here, but the containers that we're born into really don't usually support us to become ourselves fully. That was kind of a long answer.
Yeah, no, what comes up for me when you say that is like, geez, this sounds like a lot of work. So it brings up two things. One, it's a lot of work figuring out this purpose stuff, and the fact that most people don't do it. So let's talk about first, what happens if we decide that this purpose stuff is great for you and you, but I got bills to pay and I got stuff to do. I don't have time for this. What are the consequences of not following our golden thread?
Yeah, another great question. Brings tears to my eyes, actually. We can live lives that are worth living without living on purpose. And we don't gain the satisfaction and the meaning of bringing our fullest expression into the world. And what that means is that I don't get to be seen as myself. I'm always somebody else hiding back here behind this facade or this veneer of who I really am. And, we may get sort of close, like halfway there, without attending to some of this stuff. So who you are in the world may be good enough and worthy, and you're providing value and have great relationships. All those things can be true. And what would the world look like if every one of us actually brought our gifts, even amplified 10% more? So finding out a little bit about who you are, uncovering a little bit of the things that hold you back, a little bit of the beliefs that you're not worthy enough. I don't have some assumption that everybody on the planet's going to end up with a purpose statement like mine. This is what I do and why I'm here in the world. So I've worked very diligently on it. But coming to some awareness of what are my unique gifts that I could bring just a little bit more, and whatever existing roles I'm in, as a parent, as a worker, as a friend, as a community member, and whatever my communities are, my networks. If I could be just a little bit more of myself, you would find that your life has so much more richness and meaning, and you're received differently. So people will begin to see you uniquely because, like, wow, Fred just showed up, the other day at our meeting with, like, he was actually there. There was some part of him. I don't know. I can't articulate, I can't name it, but he came and showed up differently. And it was a powerful presence. And I so appreciated him showing up that way. So we become more important members of our own life, more important participants in our own life. And then we get to experience how to make decisions from that place and how to have more joy. We actually feel more joy when we're living more on purpose. People experience this as more contributing. They start calling on us. Oh, this thing you do that you do really well, I want more of that. And we begin to be appreciated and received in ways that many of us don't feel received in our lives.
And I'm sure that goes back to reinforcing that worthiness feeling once we're being seen for those gifts that are truly ours.
Right. Like when I talked about the speaking powerful truths, when I hid from my gift because I knew of this other caustic nature, like nobody could sense that I had all this great wisdom to share because I wasn't sharing it. And so I was depriving people in my life from the blessing of me knowing things that would help all of us to live more keenly in awareness of who we are. And so I had to come to see this gift in me in order to share it well, to share it with love. And that part of being on purpose is really seeing our gift as a contribution of love.
So how do we see our own gifts? I mean, I could say here and be like, I can do a couple things well. I need to get better at this. How do we figure out what our gifts are?
So, and if you take the time to read the book, what I do in the book is define what purpose looks like at the different stages in life. And so we begin to express our purpose as, babies/toddlers. It happens very, very early. And we often don't remember those things, but a parent or a sibling or an aunt or uncle might be able to say, that thing you did when you were a child, you just loved, whatever it is. And generally that is some facet of our purpose. And if we take that question, that thing that I loved, that I was passionate about, that I was curious about, that I couldn't stop thinking about, I would draw it, or I would write about it, or I would read books about it, or I watched movies, or every time it came to town, I went, to that thing. There are these many things in life that flow that are some element of our purpose. That's the golden thread aspect of it. And an exercise that I generally take my clients through, that I call weaving the whispers, is to get out a piece of paper and draw a line from left to right, and divide the paper up into decades, once every 10 years or so. And you come up with these things in your life. If you go back and ask people that well, what were the things that I was most interested or passionate or curious about? And what was I most inspired by? And what were my greatest joys, the things that I just remember as the best days of my life? And then you also would want to include the worst heartaches and the biggest challenges or hurdles and the things that hurt the most. And both of those, the best and the worst, if you want to call them that, you'll see some patterns over time about what has been some element of your purpose. And
Beautiful.
Following those threads leads to some greater understanding about, what is purpose in your life.
So I think you've alluded to them, but you've got three main hypotheses about purpose in your book. So can you lay those out so they're clear for us?
Yeah. So, this isn't just something Holly came up with off the top of her head. Oh, I'm going to these three hypotheses because I'm trained as a scientist, and because my entire life has been kind of a case study about how to survive and, and actually find meaning and joy. I have been studying as an anthropologist this thing, like
so
what
we
is
can call them theories then, Holly's theories.
Yeah, well, it is a theory, and as a scientist, it is a theory, and I did test these hypotheses in my book. And it's not a scientific book necessarily. It does have some science in it, but it's filled with stories. So the three hypotheses are: purpose is always alive in us. We come in with a soul that's calling us forward, step by step, and it's nudging and pulling and prodding us, and it serves as our GPS and pulls us forward. And that may look like this, this thing I'm excited about and passionate about and want more of, or it could look like the shadow that keeps us from moving forward in order to heal the wounding. But this purpose is our GPS, and it does live in every stage of our life, very evidently. I mean, I sort of proved that in the book. And then the second hypothesis, again, is that purpose hides behind the wounding. So we come in with these things that we're designed to heal in this lifetime, and we create these scenarios that are challenging and traumatic. And as we resolve that wounding or work through whatever limiting belief there is, we liberate something and then become more of ourselves. So it's really hard to live on purpose fully unless we begin to do this self-reflection and inquiry work to find out who we really are, so we can let go of the things that we're not. My belief about purpose is that it's designed to help us be more of who we really are and less of who we are not. That's really all it is. It's like, who are you really? And then the third hypothesis is that purpose looks different across the different stages of our life. And one of the reasons why we can't see it easily, because in childhood, it may look like a fascination with rocks. And in adulthood, it, might become might become an artist, or I might be a chemist of some sort, or something to do with metals, but we'd be looking at the intervening scenarios in between. How did that get expressed? Actually, I had a client, she's the case study, and one of the case studies in my book, and she had this fascination with putting rocks in her mouth as a child and just rolling them over and over. They felt so good. She loved the sensual texture. Well, she turned out to be a chef. And what does rocks have to do with being a chef? But as we followed the thread through her life, she was always looking for sensory experiences. And just over and over and over. And, food became a dominant part of her life as she raised a bunch of kids and became the, chief cook and bottle washer. And eventually then she went on to be a chef, and her essence is really about expressing the sensuality of life. That's her purpose. It's not just chef. It's like this, it's the uncovering of the sensual aspect of life in a way that liberates that in ourselves. So
I'm just thinking in my head, my son right now is just obsessed with Wheels on the Bus, and I'm just trying to play that forward, but I know we can't do that. Just
we can do that another time.
Yeah,
that's a great book. I love that children's book.
So we've got these three hypotheses. What are some other powerful stories of, I love these stories from these childhood things, and that they become expressed when they're older in different and unique ways. I think anything else that pops to your mind of client stories that you've had great ahas looking back?
Well, it was only through watching my clients, because I'm not even sure I understood it fully from my life until I began to observe in my clients that they would have these powerful, purposeful statements and expressions. And, I would just make it like, what is keeping you back? And so I would just, deliberated year after year, like, what is it I need to do to support this person to liberate themselves and the world? And then we would always get to the childhood wound, right? So every one of us has parts of ourselves that were what I call, fractured. That's sort of the psychologic language of it, psychotherapeutic language, is that I'm going to say another big fractured subpsychic parts. So it's the parts of us in childhood that our family generally rejected as an important part of who we were, because it rubbed up against them, and we were forced to shut that part of ourselves down, and basically that part fractured in our psyche. And so we then live through life with, one or hundreds, in my case, hundreds of these fractured subpsychic parts. Most people don't have hundreds. It's usually a few major ones. And we live through life without these parts. And it's kind of like we're dragging this long black bag with us. So one particular client that I speak about in the book, beautiful soul. I love this man, and we're friends and colleagues now. But he as a child, he had a very balanced masculine feminine. He's a big guy, very active, very powerful figure, loved sports, loved guy things, played war, got out the swords. And at the same time, he loved his girlfriends. He loved, girlfriends, and he loved to make friendship bracelets, and he loved hearing their stories, and he loved, supporting them. So there was this really sweet and beautiful, sensitive nature combined with this very masculine and beautiful yin-yang balance. But his father was totally rejecting of his effeminate side and said, that's not boy, you can't do that. And he didn't let him take art classes, and just So this part of him was totally repressed during childhood, adolescence. So as that occurred, then this man became very machoistic and was not really a great partner in life to women, and went through the trauma of being someone he really truly wasn't, in order to knock up against that thing that he had to resolve, right? So eventually he did enough self-work. He was, in men's groups and did a lot of other personal development work. And he came to see that this way of being in his world was really not him. And he began to really pull back on that. And here's the interesting thing, he pulled back so far on it that he lost the powerful self. And so when we worked together, there was some reconciliation of actually both of these parts of you are really important. And we need you to be powerful and supportive and loving and compassionate. That, we all have in us these parts that sometimes look contradictory, but in the world of full expression, we want all of you to be present. So it was, he had made so many amends to the people in his life for some of his, late adolescence, early adulthood behaviors that were kind of off the charts, that he'd lost the understanding that he also had this very unique masculine power that was important for him to live into. That's one story.
All right.
More
Beautiful.
of those.
So, this is like a body of work based on a lot of experience. In distilling this book, what was one of like the biggest ahas you had in translating your experience into the book that further put things into perspective for you?
And I had begun to realize this before I wrote the book, but it became even more apparent as I was writing. This journey to purpose actually makes our whole life, it helps our whole life make sense. So many of us go through life, me included, like, what the hell? Like, why is this so hard? Why do I have to work so hard to be happy and healthy and sane on this planet as a human? Why am I given all these challenges? Why can't it just be easier? And for decades I asked that question. Whatever your, if you have a spiritual belief, I don't, like, God, why does this have to be so hard? No longer Christian, but certainly believe in, great spirit of some sort. And I began to see that it's all it's all a big puzzle. And we have all these puzzle pieces, but we don't know what to do with them. They're in total disarray. A toddler came and dumped the puzzle on the floor, and we haven't even begun turning over all the pieces, much less putting them in some coherent shape. And we don't even know what the puzzle looks like. So it's a big mess. And my journey to purpose and the way I hold my clients in doing this work is to begin to make sense of your whole life, and that this thread that's been pulling you along offered you these many opportunities to see more of yourself in order that you could become more of the contribution and less of the shadow. And that as we do more and more of the work, we get to do more of the contribution, less of the shadow. So at each stage, it's not like there's any end point. I'm not there either. At each stage, there's more of us that shows up that's really us, and less of us that's not, can be liberated, or dissolved. So it just became, as I really pulled these stories together, again, when I wrote the book, they were all hypotheses. I wasn't actually sure. I thought these things were true because I was seeing it, but I wanted to prove it or disprove it in my book. And I really had no sense. If I had disproved them all, I might not have published. Thank goodness they all turned out. So I just believe that it's a journey, right? And each step of the journey helps us see something about who we are in a way that we get to be more of us, with, more presence, more joy, more reward of just showing up as me. And even publishing this book let something in me liberate. I had an amazing experience last week when I pushed the publish button, and the reviews started coming in, and I cried for 2 days, literally,
Oh,
because, this is a pretty vulnerable share. And even me in this vulnerability, people said, Holly, my God, this is such a contribution to the world. And I cried and cried because I didn't know if I would actually really be received fully. And the fact that I showed up as me, like there ain't nothing that's not me here and fully me, and being received just for being myself was such a gift.
that's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. You share a lot of personal stories in this book, and I don't want to kind of dive into everything, but what are people most surprised about when they meet you now and they learn about some of your past? They're like, oh, wow, you struggled with that and you've dealt with this. Like, what are some of the things that you've overcome that have been part of what you now, shed light on and allow others to share?
There were several questions in there. People are surprised that I shared so much in our culture. So that first question feels important to me. And it's why I did it, because in our culture, we're so afraid to share the truth about who we are and what we've experienced, because the toxic shame that is present is so overwhelming for most of us. We don't want to show up as ourselves because it means we'd have to divulge something about our experience. And so for me, this was a way to model, like, I am fully ready to be a parent to the world. And, I had a little trepidation about it, but as I started telling the stories and realized, oh, when I had this experience, it allowed me to work through this shadow, and this experience helped me work through this shadow. So my intent was to demonstrate through my own life and others' lives, bless their brave souls as well, or many brave people in my book, which I really want to honor, that each of us has these things that are challenging and that are very painful and traumatic, and they always help us see some version of us that's more, brilliant and more unique and more a gift to the rest of the world. And if you don't waste those opportunities, then you become a better version of yourself, a more illuminated version of yourself. So I think people are continually, I get a lot of, oh my God, I can't believe you shared all that. And then they say, I trust you so much now because you shared so much. So I have this new level of friendship with people who don't know me, who say, oh my God, you're like me, you're normal, and you've been through a lot, and I so resonated with your experiences. So, starting from childhood difficulties, abuse and neglect, and, many very challenging relationships and lots of wrong turns.
I mean, and I want to put a pin in, for example, I think people struggling in relationships, let's call it with like a primary partner, that aren't working, they could think about like that being the farthest thing from their purpose. They're like, oh, I'm just in a relationship that's not working for me, right? Talk to me a little bit about how do we turn this like, yeah, into, oh.
That's great. And I love the question, Ben, especially the sound effects. So everything is an opportunity to live more on purpose. So every relationship offers you, I often call it, life is a hall of mirrors. I've come to see there's literally nothing in our life, zero, nothing in our lives is not a chance for our life, for us to be reflected in it. So if you're in a relationship that's challenging, and you know this, if you're in a relationship that's challenging, if you look very closely at what is triggering you, what is the challenge for you, look deeply and get as granular as you can about the thing, the way of that scenario expressing itself, and then look inside for the piece that it is reflecting in you. So we choose partners in life in order to perfectly work through something that needs to be resolved in ourselves. Never. There's never been a relationship on the planet that doesn't work that way. And it took me decades to understand that. So, each relationship is an opportunity to grow and become more of ourselves, which is how we find purpose. So everything in life, every relationship, every work scenario, every, challenging parent or child or, whatever it is, it's all fodder for personal inquiry and self-development.
Gotcha. So my trigger of my wife being on her phone a little bit too much, and I'm like, why aren't you being present with me? And then I'm doing the same thing 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
Is part of me learning how to be more present and compassionate. Is that right?
Yes, and especially with yourself. So when you learn to be more present with yourself, so it's not even about you being on your phone, it's how are you not being present with yourself in a way that you can see who you are and what you contribute, which then changes your dynamic, which then supports her to be with you in that new way. So yeah, perfect mirror.
It sounds like a challenging balance between checking my notifications and doing this important self-inquiry. How do we balance that out, Holly?
Yeah, so this goes on all day, right? I mean, we're like continuously given an opportunity to see ourselves. You might carve out 30 minutes for a time with your partner to say, neither of us is going to check our notifications now. We're not going to take phone calls. Let's be with ourselves in this relationship in a way that can help us see each other uniquely and honor who we are, be grateful for each other. That's, one suggestion. I don't know if that will work for you. But I mean, the challenge really is to find new patterns for yourself. And, mini habits is something I teach my clients. So it's not, go be a new person. It's just like, what are the low-hanging fruit in your life? What is it that most triggers you? That's the biggest challenge. And look at that one thing right here today and see if you can do that just a tiny bit differently. So if you're triggered by your wife and her phone, look inside. Well, how am I doing that? How am I not being present with myself? How can I change that? Start here first. Don't start there. How can I be more present with what I need that I'm not necessarily getting from her? So I feel more fulfilled. And then I can come back to the relationship to be more present so that we can have a mutuality in our, love and respect of each other uniquely.
So what I'm hearing you say is I get to put the oxygen mask on myself instead of demanding it from her.
Yes. At least, initially. Now, that doesn't mean that bad relationships, we should stay in, abusive relationships or relationships that aren't working, long-term, big picture. I've left relationships because I kept putting the oxygen mask on year after year after year. Like, okay, I'm doing my work. I'm, not that I was perfect, but if you're the only one that does the work forever and you're growing and growing and growing and your partner is not, it might be time to consider, is this worth me staying in? And that's a really hard thing to suggest. But I also know that as we grow and as we become more of ourselves, we often do outgrow the contexts in which we find ourselves. So, this notion of a lifelong partner, I'm just going to put this out there as a possibility, that the notion of a lifelong partner is challenging if we are doing our work and growing, unless we have a partner who's also doing the same, because we begin to evolve and become more and more, gain more and more perspective on life and heal more of our stuff and become more of ourselves. And if our partner can see us in that and support us, that's great. If they want to hang back here and keep doing the same things and attempting to trigger us, we can realize I don't need to be triggered by that anymore, but it's also not necessarily serving me to stay in something that isn't actually nourishing my continued growth. So those are just thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it's, what I'm hearing you say come out of that is, as we become more of ourselves, which is aligning with our purpose, that can mesh with our partner if they're still unfolding and can walk that path with us. But if it becomes too divergent, then it may stymie us in that process. So, we get to look at everything organically rather than absolutely.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting, this whole pandemic experience. Some of the experts are saying the divorce rates are going to be really high on the other side of this, which is very sad.
Speaking of pandemic, how can we worry about purpose now in this time of pandemic?
Okay.
You got to put purpose on the back burner, Holly. Come on.
So, actually, where I was about to go, what a perfect scenario to be at home with your partners and children, perhaps, or yourself, which is just as challenging at times, and to use this as fodder for reflection. So what is it we're doing right now that is not working for us, either in ourselves, as we notice when you spend a lot of time with yourself, you notice yourself like, oh, these are the things I do every day that just annoy the heck out of me. And how am I with my partner that is not working? And how am I with my children? What are my habits of life that are not working for me? It's actually it's a great time for us to get into a heightened awareness about how we are present in life, so we can be more intentional. And, if you have time to go do this exercise and look through all your life and the things that have been, curiosities or passions or excitements for you, it might, you might have some time for that. But I really would encourage, this is a time of great reflection. We're going to be in a new world on the other side of this. We will not be going back to what was called normal. It was never normal. So we're all going to someplace else, and this someplace else, this new world, is going to require us to be more of ourselves, more of our essential selves, which is aligned with purpose. So now is a great time to start down that path, to be ready for what's next, and who knows what it's going to look like, but we actually get to create it. So if we come out the other side as more of us, I'm going to be insistent that the world serves me and all of us writ large collectively, as opposed to serving, the 1%. So being more of us will better enable and empower us to demand that our world looks differently.
100%. Love it. And, being that we've got this great mirror in this special, unique time, this relates to a question that somebody posed in social media before, and it also relates to a question that I have. How do we handle competing purposes, I don't know what we call them. And, for me, I think about, business building and serving my clients versus, family time, especially without the normal family help that we're used to. So how do we balance that? And do we just look at that conflict as another mirror? So talk to us about the competition.
Yes. So I believe, Ben, that we only have one purpose. It has a number of facets, but it has many expressions. So your purpose can be the same, but just expressed through your work, through your family, through your personal pursuits, your avocations. And it's not, and so competition is an interesting word. I don't believe that we are competing with ourselves for expression of purpose in our lives. I believe that as we uncover some of our limiting beliefs about ourselves, we can be more graceful and easeful in our lives. So there may be something, if I can use you as an example, and I'm just going to, hypothesize here, that if there is some belief in you that you have to be the best in every area of your life, I have to be the best dad, and I have to be the best partner, I have to be the best breadwinner, and I have to be the best friend, and the best, I know you're into sports and fitness and health, and I have to be the optimal health and fitness, and almost superhuman, that you are actually limiting your purposeful expression, because you can't possibly, you don't have 100% in 5 different areas of your life.
Right.
You have elements of you to give different things. And so what are the priorities right now that would call you to your highest purposeful expression at this time? given you've got two young children who, need a good dad, it seems like that probably would be an important expression for your purpose right now. And I know, it's not like anything else can go away. You're juggling a lot of balls and twirling a lot of plates, that's for sure. And so what is the way I can be most graceful in my purpose in any of these areas of my life? And this is something I have struggled with for decades. So I'm certainly not pointing fingers here. And realizing that if I relax and know that my purpose is going to be best expressed when I don't try to force it on the world or, people in my life or in my life in general, that if I am showing up gracefully and relaxed and courageous to be my best self expressed in that particular area of my life, it will naturally flow better. So I know you work to stay in flow. And so staying in flow in every area of your life, where are you not in flow and how can you get in flow? And whatever is called for at the time in any particular area, you'll be enabled and empowered to do that as best you can in that area. So, now maybe not be the time for you to do this huge scaling of your business, just as a possibility. It may just be over the top to imagine that. And it might not be the time for you to, go run the rapids on some class 5, not projecting anything on you, but there may be parts of your life like that isn't really in flow right now, even though I would love to do that. These things are right here, right now. There was a big period of time where I had to devote to parenthood. And, my business did not grow in that time. And some part of me had to retract and say, I'm going to have to save that for later because I've got these children to tend to. And I grew so much through that process that it was absolutely perfect and in flow for me to do that. So, notice what's right in front of you and what is calling for your attention. That is your call right now. That is your task in the moment.
All right. I love the way that you explain that. And yeah, it definitely resonates in terms of letting go of what you're resisting and not going against the grain. I think you had a metaphor in your book about, going down a stream with an appendage still on shore and dragging you. And it was a powerful image of not being totally in flow.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of appendages out my whole life, so I've had to learn to pull them. No, be in the slipstream. pull the appendages in.
All right. Well, as we land the plane here, is there anything that we haven't addressed that's important for people to know before we wrap things up?
Well, I would love, obviously, for people to buy the book and read it. People are telling me it is actually a quick and easy read because it's so filled with stories. And as you know, it really does describe over the stages of our life what purpose looks like, which makes it easier to have some clarity and awareness about our own purpose. Right now it is on Amazon for a promotional price and would, love as many people to buy it at that price as possible. I will be offering some online courses in the near future, so connect with me at my website, hollywoodscoaching.com, if you want to learn more about that, or find me on social media.
Yes, and a testament for the amount of the book I've gotten through so far. It is a very engrossing read, and if I had more hours in the day, I'd be through it, and I'm going to be through it very soon. And also, a plug for your coaching as well. We didn't dive into that because I didn't want to distract us, but a testament for your coaching was very powerful for me, and tugging at some of those threads to find them. So anyone would be very well served to seek you out. Holly, thank you so much for sharing yourself in this book and in this interview. Definitely the work that you do. You're definitely one of those angels in the universe. So appreciate you showing up for us. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Ben. I'm so honored. This was great.
All right. My pleasure.